As mentioned before, I'm joined now by Liberal Senator James Paterson, live from the nation's capital. Thanks for your company.
Pleasure as always, Peter. Thank you.
Was it a fiery meeting, the party room meeting, in the context of, suggestions that there'd be super getting raised, that you were sitting next to Kelly O'Dwyer? I saw in some of the footage we attempted to tap her on the shoulder and say, what on earth were you thinking?
Well, Peter, as you know, I'm not at liberty to reveal the contents of what happened in the party room, but I'm happy to say that, generally, the feeling of the party room was really very positive. It was very convivial, it was very collegiate, everyone is very happy to be back and be back in government, and very focused on a pretty serious task we have ahead, which is to deliver on our election promises and demonstrate to the Australian people that perhaps even in 3 years' time we're worthy of being re-elected again.
Well, one of your election promises was this superannuation adjustment from the budget. Will that go through unamended, or will that election promise be changed?
Well, I think it's important to say from the outset, Peter, that the core of this policy, the rationale of this policy is very strong. As a young person, I'm very troubled by findings in the recent intergenerational report, which shows that our reliance in old age on the pension is only going to decline from 70% now to 67% by 2055. That is a pretty searing indictment on the superannuation system as it was. I think it's very clear that changes were necessary. Having said that, clearly we got feedback during the election and after the budget about our superannuation package and about perhaps some of the unintended consequences of the package. And all governments are wise to listen to that feedback and take it into account. I would say, though, we were elected on a platform to deliver this policy, and there are a lot of budget implications of making any changes to this policy. So any review of it must be done in that light.
Andrew Bolt, echoed by Sonia Kruger, is calling for a ban on Muslim immigration. Do you agree?
No, I don't. I think that would be a seriously retrograde step. Australia is a country which values religious freedom and pluralism, and I would never support a ban on anyone on the basis of their faith.
All right, fair enough. No weasel words there. Let's move on to some other issues. You're in the Senate. It's going to be a pretty difficult Senate. What about the wisdom or otherwise of calling a double dissolution election, which has let the Pauline Hanson genie out of the bottle?
Well, I think it's premature to say it's going to be a more difficult Senate than the last one. I mean, it would be hard to be any more difficult than the last one. The crossbench, such as it was, with a few honourable exceptions, was really not very interested in negotiating with the government in good faith and allowing us to deliver even on our election commitments and election promises. So any Senate, I think, has a chance of being an improvement on the past one. And I'm optimistic that the new crossbench will take their roles very seriously. The one thing that you can say for sure about this crossbench compared to the previous one is that every single one of them will deserve to be there because they'll be elected on their merits, having generated significant support in the community.
Well, on exactly that, Senator, you say that they all deserve to be there. The Prime Minister pre the election said that there is no place for Pauline Hanson in the Australian Parliament, yet she won, and she won with a pretty large quotient of votes, quite frankly, particularly in Queensland. Do you agree with the Prime Minister that there's no place for Pauline Hanson?
Well, I think really what the Prime Minister was getting at is that he didn't want to see people of her views in our national parliament, and in a political campaign that's a perfectly reasonable thing for a political leader to say. Pauline Hanson obviously doesn't share many or even all of the views of the coalition on key policy issues. But now that the election has been done, anyone who has been able to generate significant community support to be there deserves to have their place there. And more importantly than them deserving to be there, the people who voted for them deserve to have their concerns heard and listened to by the government of the day.
What do you think about the very small number of women that are in the ranks of the Parliamentary Liberal Party? Does something need to be done? Not necessarily quotas. I know you philosophically don't agree with them, although I would like to tease into what the alternatives realistically are. Would you like to see more women in politics for the Liberal Party? And if so, assuming so, how do you make it happen?
Yeah, no, there's no question, Peter, that the Coalition and the Liberal Party need to do better in having more females represented in Parliament. Because we are a very democratic party, particularly in my home state in Victoria, and because power is quite decentralised, it's not something that any central body can direct or influence too easy. It's something that takes time, and it has to be driven in part by cultural change.
I've got to jump in, though, because when is that time? I mean, I've heard this ever since I moved into political commentary. I've heard this as an observer of politics for decades now from the Liberal Party, and the number of women in the parliamentary ranks of the Liberal Party now are less than in 2013. They're certainly less than at any time that John Howard was Prime Minister. At what point does the Liberal Party just have to admit that it has to do something radically different to actually make the rhetoric more than just that?
Well, the time to address it is absolutely now. I agree with you there, Peter. You know, though, that one of the reasons we have fewer female members of parliament now is because we have fewer members of parliament now. We lost some very good members.
I'm talking as a percentage. It's gone down as a percentage, James Paterson, not just numerically.
Yeah, and look, I'm in full agreement, Peter. There is work to be done here, very important work. I think the first step is looking at some of the outstanding female candidates we had in this election and lining them up to run for us again in the future, either in the seats that they ran for or even for safer seats next time, and identifying the future female talent to be mentored and developed into being the MPs of the future. That's something that I'm very committed to doing.
How does that ever happen,
a lot of my
though?
colleagues
See, the reason I'm so sort of interested in this is because, I get philosophical objections to quotas. I used to have them myself. But the reason I shifted ground on that is that I can see why businesses don't have them, because they have KPIs down through the line to hit targets, whereas political parties never seem to have that institutional set of KPIs. So if you don't have a hard and fast quota, targets end up being rather meaningless because of the fractured nature of how parties are structured. You know this as well as anyone. So I'm just curious what is going to change. Because fine words, with respect, but I just don't see how any of it's going to change. You've gone backwards. And even under Malcolm Turnbull, you've gone backwards.
Well, one of the things we know, Peter, from a really excellent report that was done last year by Nick Cater at the Menzies Research Centre and Nicole Flint, who is a new Member of Parliament at this election for the seat of Boothby, was that when women put their hands up in the Liberal Party for pre-selection, on average, they get pre-selected as often as men do. But the problem is women less frequently put themselves forward. There are less women who put their hands up for pre-selection in the Liberal Party. That's the first step that has to be addressed. We have to have more women putting their hands up. It's not as if Liberal Party branch members are sexist and discriminatory against women. They have just as good a chance getting forward if they put their hands up. But if they're not even getting to that point...
So why aren't they putting their hands up in
at the beginning? Well, one of the reasons is we have fewer younger women members in the Liberal Party. Our party has more or less equal membership between men and women. I think it's slightly tilted towards men, but many of those women are older women who are not likely to put their hands up for Parliament. So what we have is a lack of young women ready to run and put their hands up, and many of those young women may not want to put their hands up. So we have to work on convincing them to do so, and we have to work on getting more of them into the party. If they're not in the party, then it's very difficult to get them in Parliament.
The Prime Minister's apparently ringing around just after 3. We'll find out the new front bench lineup. Have you received a call or you're expecting one? Will you be outraged if you don't get one?
No, Peter. My phone's on airplane mode now to be on air with you, of course, so anything would have gone through to voicemail. But look, as you know, Peter, I'm a brand new MP. I'm looking forward to contributing from the backbench, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Never a funner time. Unfortunately, I'm on air, James Paterson, but never a funner time to hide your number and ring serving Liberal MPs. You always seem to get your phone answered when it comes from a private number when there's a reshuffle in the mix. We appreciate you joining us and putting your phone on silent during the course of this interview. Thanks for your company.
Cheers. My pleasure. Cheers.
Senator James Paterson there, live from the nation's capital.